And they should say, right, there should be a little message to say that they say it's being recorded, so you can leave if you don't want to be recorded. Right, let's get, I'm now going to put this, I've got a source sheet as always. Here's some sources. Okay. So, thank you for giving this a go. Well, perhaps 30 or 40 minutes or so. So, I wanted to look at the idea of marriage. Judaism has a conservative view of marriage. It has an understanding that a marriage is a relationship between a man and a woman, which is contracted, but not necessarily in the way which others conceive of it. Marriage is not a sacrament per se. So, for example, in many Christian traditions, only someone who's been invested with some kind of special spiritual power is entitled to conduct a wedding. Whereas in Jewish law, a wedding is an agreement which is overseen and made and formalized in a particular way. And while the person needs to be technically competent to ensure that it's done within the law, they do not need to be invested with any special powers because there are no special powers associated with it. And so the notion of wedding, a kiddushin, it does carry the idea of being holy, but it means a sense of setting aside for a special purpose, a relationship which can achieve things that others can't, rather than in some way, some kind of spiritual condition, which can only be induced in a particular place, which is the way other religions may look at it. Really, a lot of what one wants to know about marriage appears in the Torah itself. I hope you can see these sources. I'm going to use my little, my red dot. So here's some text about the concept, and here we go. Here's a text that you probably know. It's the end, towards the end of the first chapter of the Torah, Bereshis Aleph. Vayomer Elohim, and God said, Na'aseh Odom, let us make man. Why it's written in the plural is not this shir, but I'm noting it. But Salmenu Kidmusenu, in our image, like our form. Whatever exactly that means, but it means not that we look like God, but it means that we have the capacity, unlike every other creature, to somehow emulate the divine. And that's going to be relevant, I think, in this conversation. And what will the role of this man thing be? He or they will rule over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the heaven, and the animals, and all the land, and everything that creeps upon the land. And God made the man, God created correctly. The root base resh aleph means to create, usually ex nihilo. God created the man, but salmoi, in his image, meaning investing in this man, and clearly you'll see that it is a single creature at this stage, invested in this man entity and some special properties that other creatures that have so far come into the world do not have. But salmoi in his image, that's what it means. It's important to understand that the root of the word salmoi is tselem, and tselem is used in modern Hebrew. Tsilum is photography in modern Hebrew. It means to take an image. You can understand where this word came from. Salma is a camera, but the word actually is sail, which means shadow. It means human beings have the ability to shadow, to replicate certain behaviors or certain positions of the divine, and this word is not used with respect to the animals. But Selim Elokim Boroisoi, in the image of God, he created it, that's singular. So Horn Kevor Boroisom, male and female, he created them. This verse is very difficult because of the switch from the singular to the plural. Clearly, it starts off, the man is some kind of creature, and we'll see. Rashi will pick up
also,
on
it
this.
looks like our likeness also goes, or our image goes from our image to his image.
Right, but that's written as our image here, because for reasons we acknowledge but didn't explore, God said, let us make man. Okay. So therefore, when you say our image, that's not about man being plural, that's about some plurality associated with God, which is very problematic, but it's a different topic. Okay. But I think it's good that we've noted it, but it's the plurality in God rather than in us. We may come back to that point. The difficulty in this verse is the exchange that we go from it's a single creature, create him or it, perhaps more correctly, because the masculine suffix can also mean it. But Tselem Elokim Boroso, in the image of God, he created it. Zochon Kevel Boroso, male and female, he created them. This is a very difficult verse. And God blessed them, and he said to them, Elokim, God, Pururuvu, be fruitful and multiply, and fill up the earth, v'chivshua, and conquer it, urudu v'gas hayom, and rule over the fish of the sea, hashomayim, and the birds of the heaven, and everything that creeps upon the earth. Rashi, discussing this, notes the difficulty which we've already identified. It's partly noticing this and also noting that in the second creation story, male and female created them. But further on, it looks like a contradiction. It says, he took one of his ribs or sides, depending on how you choose to translate it, and the story unfolds, which we'll read shortly. So Rashi says, how do you reconcile this? Rashi understands that the Torah is a perfectly consistent work, and therefore any contradiction must be dealt with. Any problem in the text must be harmonized. Shabaron shtei partzufois, because he created them initially as a double-faced entity, and after that divided it. Meaning that the way this is to be understood is that man starts off as a single entity with both male and female characteristics, and then later on, God divides it. So this story seems to be saying the following. God created a man entity, and God created this entity with both male and female dimensions, and then later on divided it. This is why Rashi, although the classic translation is he took one of his ribs, leading to an entire genre of humor, this word is not translated by Rashi as a rib, but as a side, because he understands there is an entity that's male and female in some sense together, and then is divided. So this is the starting point. Let's move up a little bit on the page and see the rest of what we've got here. Another passage that you know, incorporating the verse that we just read, that Rashi adduced for his contradiction. So this is now in the second creation story, where there's a much longer section about the creation of human beings. Lord God said, Lo tov heyos ha'adam levadoi. It is not good for the man to be alone. Meaning, assuming we're following Rashi's line, it's not good for this entity to be a singularity. Alone means not that you're not alone quite in the sense there's no one currently to be with, but it's not good to be single. Single, not in the way we are using it today, for somebody who's single who doesn't have a partner, but it means someone who is just alone. They're the only one of their type. So, Eseloi, Esa Connectoi, I will make for him, and this is a very hard phrase to translate, but also significant in our study. Esa means a help, often translated as a help meet, but it's an odd phrase, which is not normally used in English, one of those words that you only use when translating Hebrew words that you don't understand. Esa, help, Connectoi, opposite him. Well, is something that helps, doesn't oppose you. They seem to be contradictory, but we'll come back to that. And the Lord God formed from the ground all the beasts of the field, and all the birds of the heaven, and he brought them to the man, what he would call it. And calling it seems to mean not just, oh, that's called George, or this is called an elephant. It means identifying with it, understanding, identifying in some profound way to see whether this will be a partner. But first, anything that the man called it, any living entity, that became its name. So this means he had some quite profound understanding of its essence. The name is not an arbitrary label in Hebrew, but is in fact some kind of sense of its shame, which means its kind of identity. And this continued. And man named all of the animals and the birds of the air, and all of the beasts of the field. But man did not find a help meet opposing him. meaning having gone through all the animals, and there's a rather graphic text. I can't remember whether I put it on here or not. Let's have to have a quick look to remind myself. I did not. There is a very graphic Gemara, which obviously is not to be taken literally, which says that he had intercourse with each of these creatures. And he didn't find an appropriate partner. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean that he tried out an elephant. That didn't quite work. And then he had a go with an ant, and that didn't work. It does not mean that. And it would be foolish to say it means that. The rabbis are offering a profound insight, but in a parable, meaning there was an attempt to connect, to profoundly understand, and see whether it would be possible to have a shared experience, an aligned identity with, which in our world means having an intimate experience with, and that didn't work. And man now understands there is nothing in the world that currently exists that God has created with which he can partner in a meaningful way, which will be the Ezer Kenegdo, create this partnership, the nature of which we haven't yet explained. So Vayapel, let me just make the text a little larger, it's easy to read. Here we go. It's all very clever. Vayapel Hashem Elokim Tardimo, and the Lord God made a deep sleep fall al ha'odom upon the man. And he slept by and he took, where the translation here says one of his ribs, but we already know that Rashi translated one of his sides, meaning Rashi understands that this creature, which is a hermaphrodite, is divided into two. And he closed up the flesh beneath it, meaning the wound was then healed up. And this side that was taken from the man creature is built into a woman independently by and he brought it to the man. The man is now male. And the man, I suppose, looked at her, considered her. This time, and of course, a simple understanding of this is after all of the experiments so far, in which I've attempted to see whether I can partner and deeply identify and properly understand and become aligned and partnered with everything else, this time, after all those failures, bone of my bones, or vosom ebesori, and flesh of my flesh, the zosi koresha. That is why she is called woman, because she's taken from man, meaning they are of one. They're of one substance. And the Gemara has a very powerful image that since they begin together and they are divided, the goal is to return to that connected state that existed prior to them being divided, which in a more metaphysical sense means there's some kind of soulmate. The Torah knows of this idea. It's discussed in the Gemara, that somehow or other there's a connection at a profound level. And there's a sense that one will want to recover that relationship, but through one's own energies. And that will take us back to an important idea in a moment. Al Kain, therefore, Yazov Ish Es Oviv V'Isim. That is why a man leaves his mother and his father, the dog Vak B'Ishtoy, and cleaves to his wife, Voyulav Osoi Echad, and that will be of one flesh. So that story is very familiar. And there are many, I think, nuances, profound ideas. But we seem to be going, so what we've seen so far, I think, is that man begins as a single entity. Man is to represent the divine, and in the divine itself, there is a plurality that creates tension. That on the one hand, it consults itself. Let us make man. Who's God talking to? There's only one God. It's a basic principle. No, Rashi is talking to the angels, whoever he's talking to. There is an inbuilt plurality which makes the story difficult. And there is a reflective plurality within human beings. And the human beings cannot find, as it were, that sense of connection without first being divided and then reunited. So that being reunited means returning to some kind of pre-division state. And it also seems to mean being able to reflect the divine will. And there's lots written about this in mystical sources about upper and lower waters, about different aspects of a kind of profound, the male and female aspects of the Godhead. And of course, pure Maimonideans would start to cringe at this because the Rambam is extremely opposed to offering any kind of descriptors of God, and using phrases like male or female and so on upsets the Rambam a great deal. But we will do what Reb Chaim Volozhiner said, writing in the first half of the 19th century, that of course, at some existential level, God is indivisible. That's what it means to be the one God, not just that there is one God, but God is one in some existential sense. But from our perspective, we perceive God as divided, and therefore our lives reflect that division to some degree, although at an intellectual stroke theological level, it will be heresy to understand that God is anything other than a singularity. And that means that there are tensions in the divine, whether it's tensions between justice and mercy, whether it's tensions between potential and actualization, whether it's potential between a sense that creativity is a good thing, or there's a discussion in the Gemara: was it better the world is created or not created? Is it better the man will be created or not created? And the conclusion was, very unhelpfully after 2 years of discussion, would a better man not been created? But given he's been created, he might as well behave himself. It's not. I don't know how it took them 2 years to get to this conclusion, but nonetheless, those creative tensions are what produces spirituality, that there's a sense of tension and drive. And this is the real meaning of Eselo Eza Connecto, this phrase here, which appears twice: I will make them a helpmeet opposite to him, this strange phrase. And having attempted to unite in some way with every entity in the world, Adam discovers Ula Odom Lo Motza Eza Connecto, he couldn't find that. So on the next page, I'm going to briefly explore what that might mean in two different iterations, one a famous one, and an unknown one, which is one of my all-time favorite sources. Probably heard me quote it before. So in the Rashi, we have Ezer Kenegdo. Rashi is immediately aware that Ezer, a help, and Kenegdo, something oppositional, seem to be in contradiction. So Rashi offers what I regard, I still never understand this Rashi properly, one of the most unhelpful comments I recall him making. How so? He says they're not an integrated pair. They're alternatives. Zocha, if he merits, i.e. things go well, Ezer then shall be a help to him. Loi Zocha, if he's unworthy, it doesn't go well, Kenegdo lehilochem, that she'll be opposite to him to fight with him. So I've often asked, so if you're writing a translation of this phrase according to Rashi, what would you write? You can't say, I'll make a helpmeet, or depending on how things work out, an opponent. That doesn't make sense at all. So I've never found out how Rashi would translate this verse. And this seems to be an extremely problematic Rashi because it deconstructs the verse in a way that does not really fit with the grammar or the trop or the sense. And it's a very strange Rashi because while that might be an attractive midrashic reading, Rashi tells us, actually just in the next chapter, that his role is to give you a simple, easy to read version of the text. What I much prefer, and I think it feeds into the kind of direction I'm taking this in, is this piece. This piece is written by someone called Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner, the Rebbe of Ishbitz, who was a controversial Hasidic figure who died in 1850 in a small village, which was a quite well-known place. Sadly, it became well-known later because it was the way station for the deportations from Lublin. And so when you drive out of Lublin, last time I was in Poland, I recall driving through Ishbitz on the way out of Lublin, and you will see that it became well-known or infamous because it was one of the stations in which they gathered people prior to deporting them to camps. But Ishbitz in its time was a small Hasidic enclave with some very creative and controversial figures. This is in the 19th century, long before those events, and long before there was a railway station there, I'm sure. And the Ishbitzer is a very unusual thinker, and he says the following, and actually it fits the text so much better. Eselo Ezer Connector, he quotes the phrase, which I've shot, I will make for him a helpmeet opposite to him, and we know what Rashi's problem is, we identified it when we read the text. The explanation of this matter is, this is the will of God. That a person, and he does not just mean a man, he means a person or man or a woman, that we'll read it in the masculine because it's written in the masculine, but it's not confined to a man. Ezer, his help, Visiator and his assistants, should sprout midova shehu kenegdo, from something that is his opposite. Now, these few words might seem a little confused, but what he means is that if a relationship is about development and it's about help and growth, there has to be a degree of opposition in the relationship. Rashi's reading there as alternatives has missed a profound observation, that the Ezer is the Kenegdo. Now, I realize that wasn't a very good English sentence, but it means that the help, the opportunity for growth and development lies in being challenged. And a relationship that is meaningful is not just about everything all being wonderful. It's about the challenges. Obviously, there can be situations where the challenges are so profound and unmanageable that the relationship is untenable. But within certain reasonable boundaries, that God's will is that the Ezer will sprout from something which is oppositional. The way I would put it is that tennis is boring with one person. To challenge your tennis game and to grow, you need someone on the other side of the net hitting the balls back. And as you become more proficient, they need to hit the balls back in a more challenging way, although it becomes too easy. And that is the nature of a relationship, which somehow or other, I mean, to continue the same parable, keeps the ball flying over the net and allows it to work for a profound dance between these oppositional parts, in turn reflecting these competing aspects of the divine, which are about judgment and mercy, which are about creativity and, let's say, and control. These are all parts of the human psyche, and that's why the Ezer Kenegdo, this type of this inbuilt helpmeet stroke oppositionalism or opposition is very much part of the realization of the Tselem Elohim, of the divine image. And he explains what he means, although actually he said what he needs to say. Dahainu kamosh talmid laharav. We find the same thing with a student for his teacher, as we find in the Gemara. Sorry, for some reason these brackets have appeared the wrong way round. Rebbe Shimon ben Lakish, Rebbe Yochanan, and Reish Lakish, and Rebbe Yochanan, who are the most famous sparring partners in the whole of the Talmudic period, who were originally opponents, became brothers-in-law. Reish Lakish married Rebbe Yochanan's sister. Davi Makshile Kovdalad Kushisa. They would pose each other 24 questions, Mufarakle Kovdalad Pirikin, and they would offer in response 24 answers. And what will be the point of this exercise? Because by challenging each other, Umimela automatically Rav Kashmaisa. Everything there will be an expansion, a growth, a development. This is, as it were, exercising the muscle in order for it to grow and develop. For Loika Rebbe Elazar the Amalei Tana de Messiah, not just like Rebbe Elazar, who just quotes constantly to support his view. We grow through challenge. Because when a person perceives what challenges him, he will, as it were, he will have to justify and hone his words to a higher degree. But yes, arise with greater proof, and his ideas, and of course in his comparison, the ideas will emerge with greater illumination, and of course transpose that. It means there will be a greater opportunity for personal development and to achieve something remarkable that could not be achieved alone. This appears to be the ideal framework that the Torah wishes the spiritual development of human beings to be put into. It's of course worth acknowledging there are some people who don't want to get married, there's some people who are not able to get married, and so on, and one acknowledges that. Nonetheless, the Torah has this understanding, and it's very clear, I think, why it's framed like this. The Ishbitzer, who is one of my favorite thinkers, I've been obsessed with his ideas for the last 25 years. What is remarkable is writing hundreds of years after Rashi, and yet he offers so much better explanation of why these two words appear, rather than doing what Rashi does, which is to atomize the text into two competing options, which really don't fit too well. So recapping where we're up to so far, we see a concept of man being able to reflect and implement the divine through a challenge and a mission. That is done in opposition to, with a supporter, in a relationship which is loving, but it's challenging, and intended, as we saw on the previous page, to somehow or other fulfill the deepest desires, beginning as a single entity in the original story as a physical single entity, in a later iteration at some notional, perhaps pre-birth level, to try to find a soulmate with whom one will be able to grow and develop and achieve one's potential in the world. Now, the process by which this entity is created, and one moves, for example, from the sort of, if you like, kind of random creativity that relationships can be, that the very strong sexual drive that all human beings experience, or most human beings experience, to channel those in a kind of creative and constructive direction, to allow what is ordinarily not permitted, but not just to allow, but to permit, encourage, and even mandate, a process which acknowledges that this creativity is now being channeled through two people into a unit. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the marriage, the process of marriage itself. Jewish marriages ceremonies are very, very brief. Jewish weddings can be extremely long, but they're not quite the same thing. You can get someone who spends a long time reading the Kesubah in a rather boring way, and makes an uninteresting, lengthy speech. The actual wedding ceremony takes at most 10 minutes, because it really just has two parts. The first part is the Kiddushin, or Erusin. Now, a little bit of history. Until around 1,000 years ago, which is quite recent in Jewish history, the two parts of the wedding ceremony that we see today as one, or know as one, were originally two. The couple there would be an agreement they would marry. I'm sure in certain older societies, arranged via or together with their parents. There would be some kind of arrangement, probably about dates, times, finances, whatever. And then they would gather family and friends, probably immediately, and conduct what we would probably today call an engagement. However, an engagement is really just a party today. It's a party in which the couple get an opportunity to celebrate the fact that they have committed to get married at some point in the future. This is not an engagement. This is the betrothal. And the betrothal means that the couple are now, as it were, wedded together. And just at a technical level, after this process is complete, the dissolution of this would require a get. And so around 1,000 years ago, probably because things went wrong, it became more common that they'd never got to the second stage. You've got all these people who've had betrothals and not actually gone to live with each other, or for financial reasons to make it easier, or for other practical reasons. The two parts of ceremonies, perhaps amongst some Yemenites, where this may even still be practiced, were brought together. It's universal in both Ashkenazi and Sfaradi circles to conduct the Erusin, the betrothal, and the Sheva Brachos, which are the Nesuin, what I translate usually as nuptials, in a single entity. How does this work? The first part is really a declaration. When I said before, you don't need to be specially trained. Rabbis who conduct weddings do tend to have training in this area, or as in my case, picked it up on the job. I hope that the 120 or so couples that I've married over the years found my services to be satisfactory. But the first part, it doesn't require someone any kind of, there's no sanctification other than what we call sanctification. We make a bracha, we praise God, and we make a declaration of sorts. And this declaration is, we make a bracha over wine. Everything starts with wine. Wine has a very particular role in life cycle ceremonies. It represents spirituality. It represents the kind of celebration of physical pleasures, which wine represents. It represents also the kind of improvement as one gets older aspect of physical life, where physical life tends to deteriorate. We all get older and frailer and more forgetful as we get older, but in the spiritual world we improve, and wine is the only thing really in the physical world that we encounter ordinarily that improves as it gets older. So it represents the ability to kind of grow and develop within the physical world, notwithstanding the limitations. Bracha over wine, and then we say this bracha. And this bracha, of course, is saying that we're now going to move from a place where we could have married anyone, but we're now going to commit to each other. God is sanctified with his commandments and his commandments concerning forbidden relationships. and even forbade us those to whom we are betrothed, meaning a couple who are merely betrothed are not allowed yet to live together. But permitted us those to whom we have conducted with whom we can nuptials. And how's that done? Chuppah we're going to do shortly, and kiddushin. Traditionally in our world, this takes place beneath a chuppah, but technically the chuppah is only needed for the next bit, because the chuppah represents the entry to the home and the moment of beginning to live together. And Baruch Atah Hashem, Mekadesh Am Yisrael, he sanctifies his people, Israel, al yidei chuppah v'kiddushin, through chuppah, which means this kind of symbolic home where the brachos will be said and the kiddushin ceremony. However, that's all an introduction. The actual kiddushin, this is a framework, the actual kiddushin is conducted using a ring, and the ring is placed by the groom on the bride's finger, having made a declaration about what he's doing, and that's done in front of two witnesses. But these are technical details. This is really the sense that we're moving from where we are looking for a partner, we're looking for a soulmate, to saying we're now actually going to come together. And until that point, we're not allowed to be together, because we're moving through various stages which enable us to realize the original aspirations of marriage. So then, and we'll go through this quite quickly because I'm sure this is familiar, the second part of the ceremony, which was originally done 12 months later after the couple had gone back to their family homes, gather whatever dowry or bits and pieces, got themselves together, and a month later, a year later, they would gather and they would say these brachos beneath the chuppah, and then they would begin to live together. And the brachos are really a way of contextualizing what creativity goes into marriage, the historical context of marriage, and they're very interesting. And I often say at chuppahs that this is, of course, that was in the day when we used to do weddings. I haven't actually done a wedding since Terry and Ruth got married in February of last year, although there are some coming along shortly, I hope. And again, we introduce it with the wine for reasons I've said, and then there are 6 more brachos to make up the 7. But they're very much about God's creative power being invested in human beings and the history and background of relationships, as it were, messages that capture some of the ideas we've said, if you understand them properly, with which to send the couple off into their married life together. So the first one is our kol borah lichva, everything's created for God's glory, meaning that we're about to have a wonderful ceremony. There might be a big party, the couple are about to sleep together, but everything is geared to the glory of God and the notion of spirituality in the world, everything, even our great physical pleasures. Because it is God, Yotzer HaOdom, who creates man. I managed to miss out the blank line here. And then we elaborate, and we're starting to talk a little bit about introduction to marriage, how that fits into this framework. So far, nothing obviously about marriage. Asher Yotzer HaOdom B'Tzalmoi, who created man in his image. This is starting to sound familiar. This is reflecting the tropes we saw on the previous page. But Tselem Demus Tavnisoi, making his form in the form of likeness, meaning all those are just paraphrases from the sections of Bereshis 1 we saw on the previous page. This is all a framework within which the notion of marriage will appear. The Hiskin lo menu binyan ade ad, which means he fixed up for him a permanent binyan construction. It's a very strange phrase. And blessed God who creates man. For me, this is saying that there is a framework which God has created, a building, as it were, within which it's going to be possible to realize the glory of God, the purpose of the creation of man, and that is a euphemism for marriage, which doesn't really get mentioned explicitly until we're a bit further on. But here are the 3 remaining brachos. This is the last page, by the way. I think I only did only 3 pages. It's time to finish by around 9 o'clock. And we now look forwards and backwards simultaneously to what marriage could be, has been. So tosis the sogel akoro. So akoro means the barren one. It's been translated as barrenness. It's a rather strange noun here. This is just the translation that was accessible. That the barren one will surely result the kibbutz boneho l'socho b'simcha, with the ingathering of her children to her in joy. What's this talking about? This is not obviously talking about marriage at all. The barren one appears to be the kind of exiled divine presence, returning to the land, the kind of return, what's called kibbutz golios, the ingathering of the exiles, rejoicing, as it says, Baruch Atah Hashem v'samech Tzion b'voneho, who makes Zion rejoice in her children. So what is fascinating about this is this is very big theme stuff. Why would you mention this in the middle of a wedding? And it seems to be because there's a sense that there's this kind of putting a brick in the wall. Each marriage, each relationship is building part of this bigger picture, which brings about the redemption, which is that you are being told by hearing this at the wedding, that you are, as it were, a small cog in a very big system, but an essential one, that you are a facilitator of the aspirations of Jewish history, of eventually returning to the Garden of Eden, which we're going to learn about next, about the Garden of Eden, the Edenic experience, which man and woman initially enjoy, mess up, and to which history and each stage in history is geared to the return through subsequent successive generations, trying to, as it were, make their contribution to the spiritual development of individuals, communities, generations, and eventually history towards a final goal. As is said here, because it follows, once you understand there's an aspiration, the aspiration is to return to the garden, because you will surely gladden these loving friends, the Remov, which is of course a euphemism now finally for the married couple. We're on number 6, and there hasn't been really even a poetic reference. In what regard? Because as you made your creation, this translation is inaccurate. The word Yitziracho is singular, for those who have a smattering of Hebrew. As you made your creation rejoice in the Garden of Eden as at first. Why do you think this is in the singular, this word? It seems to me that it's harking back to the story we saw, where there's a single entity which eventually is divided into two, but then seeks, as it were, its return to itself. Your original creature in the Garden of Eden, perhaps before that division, because ultimately the aspirations of the couple are to come together in a way that recreates the world, as it were, prior to being divided. But now God is Mesameach Chosam B'Kalo. Here is Mesameach Tzion B'Voneho, rejoicing Sion in her children. And here it's Mesameach Chosam B'Kalo, who makes the bride, the groom and bride rejoice. Sorry about gladden. I'm not sure where these translations got these words from. And finally, having looked backwards, first of all set a framework for history, then look backwards, then you see a more detailed denouement, which is the final bracha. Asher bara sosam v'simcha. This is the God who created happiness and rejoicing. Chosam v'kalo, just stuck in there, groom and bride. Gila rino ditza v'chedva ava v'achva v'sholom v'reus. These are all different sorts of joy, rejoice, celebration, love, companionship. Me'ira Hashem Elokeinu shema ba'orei Yudom. That speedy Lord our God should be heard in the streets of Judah, and the courtyards of Jerusalem. Kol sosa v'kol simcha, kol chosom v'kol kalo. The voice, and this is a paraphrase of a verse in Jeremiah. The sound of rejoicing, the sound of celebration, which equates the sound of the groom and the bride. Kol mitzalis chasim emichubasom. The sounds of the singing grooms coming from their canopies, and young people coming from the feast of their singing, and God is Mesameach Chosan im hakalo. This is just the chosan and kalo together, but this is the chosan with the kalo. This type of joy is created only when they do it together in harmony, and the root ayin mem always means something which joins together. The word people, which means a collective of people with a single objective, is exactly the same word as that word im. And so these texts, as it were, reflect the aspirations and concepts that we've seen in marriage so far. Now, in just a couple of minutes remaining, I have 2 remaining sources that I want to share with you. One could really have an entire series on this, and I picked a few ideas, but there are many. Here is an excerpt from Rabbeinu Bachya's Kat HaKemach. Now, the Kada Kemach is a most unusual work. It's a dictionary of Jewish concepts written by the great Bachya, who was a 13th century philosopher and commentator, and it's written like a modern book. It's a very interesting, and this is from Chauvel's translation. Is written in Hebrew, but there is a translation of it, which I have on my shelf. Just as the world will attain perfection only at the time of the aforementioned wedding, which is the era of the Messiah, so man can attain perfection only when he's united with his spouse in marriage. Marriage is also analogous to the creation of the world. Just as a world was created with 10 sayings, so the 10 ordained that the benedictions of the wedding rite be recited in the presence of a quorum of 10 men. Further, just there were 7 days, including the Sabbath, the creation of worlds, so the sages ordained 7 wedding blessings. Now, there's a lot more of this, but he's touching on the same ideas, which is there's a sort of messianic dimension, there's a sign of fulfillment idea, there's a sort of completing the objectives of creation. There's a kind of cycle of Shabbos. There's all these ideas Bachya sees encoded in the marriage because, as it were, there's a confluence of concepts that the marriage is geared to address, enhance, and to achieve for the couple much more they could have achieved on their own. Now, the last source is actually very slightly off track, but it's one of my favorites. Now, this is a piece from the Abudraham. And the Abudraham is not, as the name might suggest, an Indian restaurant, but is in fact one of the medieval commentators who has given us a lot of ideas and commentary on the familiar prayers. And he asks a question, I've quoted this at weddings, so you'll forgive me if you've heard me say this before. And it's an idea which I'm particularly fond, and I think it's a good place to wrap this up. Yesh shoyalim. So David Abudraham asked the following question. One may ask, why is it that on Shabbos the rabbis saw fit to institute 3 prayers that are different from one another? On a weekday, the Amid is the same, Shachris Mincha Mariv. On Yom Tov, Shachris Mincha Mariv is the same, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Musaf has a slightly different purpose, because it's added in on special days. But every day of the year, except for Shabbos, the Amida for the Shachris Mincha is the same. But on Shabbos, it's completely different. Atok Yidashta, you sanctified the Shabbos day, that's Friday night. Yismach Moshe, Moshe rejoiced, that's Shabbos, that's Shachris. And Va'ato Echad, you are one and your name is one, who is like your people, one Israel, that's Mincha. Why do they see fit to do this? It differs from every other day in the year. On Yom Tov is just one. You chose us as the same. All the same. Mariv, Shachris, or Mincha. So what? You think what I'm talking about? It's got nothing to do so far with our story. One may say it's because Shabbos is called a bride. And God is called the groom. Because of this, Tiknu Atok Yidashta, the rabbis put the text, Atok Yidashta, you sanctified, at the beginning. When a couple marry, the first stage is Kiddushin. We just learnt that. So Atok, you sanctified, means you performed an act of Kiddushin. Al Shem Kiddushin Nosen Echos on the card. That's the Kiddushin which the groom gives to the bride as the ceremony. What's the next bit after the ceremony is finished? Yismach Moshe. Moshe will rejoice. After the Kiddushin, after the Chuppah is over, then there's the Simcha. Al Shem Simcha Zechos and the celebration of the groom and the bride, the wedding Simcha. V'avakach Mosef Musaf Shem Tesefish and Mosef Achos and Maksubas Akalo. So he tries to fit in Musaf, how that works. He makes certain commitments to beyond the minimum. I don't like extra commitments. I'm not totally persuaded by that one. So let's leave that one. Or because they bring offerings which are like the Musaf offering. I'll just miss that out altogether. But this is the good bit. And what happens at Mincha on Shabbos? You are one. Your name is one. We are one and we come together after the Kiddushin, which brings them together formally and permits them to live together. Then the celebration of the importance of building a new family and achieving the divine aspirations. Ultimately, the purpose of this is to live together, that they're intimate and they begin their life together as a couple. So Shabbos Mincha, we're one, we come together as one, And that reflects the final stage of the wedding, which is the chosn and kala being miyached together, meaning being intimate and coming together. And what he's doing here, I think it's a beautiful piece, and I think it's really an explanation of the Shabbos davening. But what he's saying is that he understands that the purpose and direction of the wedding reflects the notion at a bigger level, a meta level, the Jewish people's relationship with God, evolving from coming together to celebrating to eventually merging, but also achieving the ultimate aspirations that God sets for human beings in creation, for which we set out that while it wasn't work for everyone and not everyone is fortunate to find a way of doing this, that it does seem to be the way, the instrument that is designed for this purpose for those who are able to use it. And so they are some reflections on marriage, perhaps from a different perspective, thinking about some sources, how a few different ideas fit together. And if there are any questions, this is your moment. Wakey, wakey. Otherwise, I think we'll stop. And as it's a short series, the one on the right at the other end of the spectrum, on Avelis and Mourning, will be in 2 weeks' time, the same time.
Okay.
Good night. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night. Good night. Good night.